Hello and welcome to the first proper lesson in this course where we are going to create and set up a very basic Visual Studio project. We're also going to download the SDL third-party library that's going to help us manage the screen, the OpenGL context and the input. Finally, we're also going to need that GLSL plugin from the Visual Studio Marketplace and make sure that it's correctly installed. For this lesson, we are going to set up our project in a Windows 10 environment. However, I will also show you the library files needed for Mac and Linux setup. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is head over to Visual Studio. So if you head over to that website using your favorite browser, just head over to visualstudio.microsoft.com/downloads, or if you use your favorite search engine, just type in Visual Studio Community 2019 and it should take you straight over here. Now we want Visual Studio 2019 Community. There's also Professional and Enterprise. These you have to pay for. If you want, you can trial them out before. But everything we need, especially for this course, is going to be inside Community. Right, all you got to do is click on Download, and your download should start whenever it's ready. There we go. Just hit Save, and then you can go ahead and install. I already have Visual Studio Community installed, so I'm not going to go ahead and do that, but that's the process you would follow. Okay, as mentioned before, we are going to need SDL. So if you go to libsdl.org, you'll end up at this site over here. And what we want to do is download the developer tools or libraries needed. So we just go to download SDL releases. Okay, and we scroll down a bit. We don't want runtime binaries or source code. You could download source code and build it yourself, but we're going to go straight here to development libraries, and for Windows we're going to go for the top one, the Visual C++ 3264-bit, and just click on that and save, and then it will download it into your downloads folder, and I'll show you shortly what we do with that. Okay, so for Mac users, just go to the Mac OS X under development libraries as well, and just download this DMG file. And equally for Linux users, just follow the instructions here. So please contact your distribution maintainer for updates. Okay, so these videos in this course will predominantly focus on Visual Studio and build a project within the Windows 10 environment. However, you can still follow along if you are a Mac user. You just have to download and use Xcode if you want to for your IDE, whereas for Windows 10 we'll be using Visual Studio. And for Linux there are many different options you have there for an IDE as well, so you can use that. So an alternative to Visual Studio, if you're not in a Windows environment, and even if you are in a Windows environment, you can use CLion, which is also a cross-platform IDE for C and C++. So if you're not in a Windows environment, you can use this. Just download that. The only downside is you only get a 30-day trial, after which you have to pay. But it is an option. At least you can try it out. So yeah, give that a bash, especially if you're on Linux or Mac users. You can use CLion. Another option for if you're in an environment that's not Windows, you could use code blocks as well, which is for free, so you could try that too. But all in all, most of these videos, like I say, will be focusing on Windows 10, and I will be using the Visual Studio Community 2019 IDE. Okay, once you have Visual Studio installed, you should have what's called the Visual Studio Installer set up on your system. So on a Windows machine, we'll just click here and just type in Visual Studio Installer. And so basically what the installer does, it manages the installations of Visual Studio. So now you could have other versions of Visual Studio installed. So I have 2019 and 2017, and this installer is a nice program application that manages all of that for us. Okay, so once it's installed, what we want to do is modify. We want to make sure, if you haven't already done this, we want to make sure that at the very least we have all the C++ components installed, because we're going to need that. So real easy, you just head over to desktop development with C++ and just make sure that's ticked. Again, I have all of this installed, so I'm not going to actually install it. But if you don't have it, you just click modify. It also tells you how large that's going to be, how much disk space it needs. And then you can also set if you want to install while downloading or download all and then install. Right, if you're feeling a little brave, and of course you know what you're doing, you can head over to individual components, and here's where you can tick all the individual components that you want to install within Visual Studio. By ticking on desktop development with C++ alone should give us all the core features for C++, so you shouldn't have to install individual things, but just know that you can do that if you so wish. What you really need, again, is the C++ core elements or components, and you need to make sure that you have the actual 32 64-bit compiler installed as well. That's the very core essentials here, but this option here should do that for you. Right, once we have that done, we're going to go ahead and open up Visual Studio, and once that's all open, we're going to say create a new project. Okay, and I'm going to start with an empty project, okay, an empty C++ project. Now there's many templates that Visual Studio offers us, so make sure it's an empty C++ project. If you're looking for templates, just search for them up here, but mine's already listed here, so empty project C++ from scratch. Click next. I'm going to call this graphics, let's call it graphics engine, because that's more or less what I'm aiming to do here. Location, where do you want it to, where do you want the project to be stored? I'm going to put mine on desktop. Simply desktop, select folder. Make sure you put it in a place where you are able to find it again. We don't want to lose our projects. And that will be the solution name. Project and solution name will stay the same. And you can tick this if you want the solution or SLN file to be in the same directory as where your project files and your project filters and your source code lies. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to leave it in a separate folder in the root. I'll get more to that in a bit. And then you just hit create. Great, now we have our project open in Visual Studio. The first thing we want to do is right-click source files and add new item. We want to add a main.cpp source file. This is where everything is going to start off. At the very least, I will need my stream so I can output to the terminal window. I'm just going to do a very basic int main, and we'll just do system pause so we can prompt us to enter any key to go back into Visual Studio, and then just return 0. Or you could just make this void main return nothing. I'm just used to doing it this way. But this is a very basic empty project right here. Build that. If you don't see the little build icon up here, just right click on your menu bar up here and just tap on build. Or you can just press F5, which will build and run the application. Build only builds it, and the little play button here actually runs it. But if you press F5, it'll build and run at the same time. Running this will do pretty much nothing, since it's a very basic application, but at least we have something to start with. Right, okay, so once you've downloaded the SDL library, it should come packaged in a zip with this name here, SDL2 develop 2.0.12. That's the version we're using. And here's our Visual Studio project we've just created. So if we open that up, you'll see there's my .sln solution file. Here is the project file where you'll have all the source code and the project and the filters and all of that. Here's a debug, and subsequently a release build will also create a release folder, and you have your .vs, which is for all your pre-compiled stuff for Visual Studio. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we'll just unzip this to our desktop, okay, and we can just remove that. So let's take a look what's inside. So in SDL, first of all, we don't need any of this documentation. You can always re-download it if you want to read it, and it's available online, so that's fine. Also, the docs folder, let's just get rid of that. I'm going to drag all the files that we need onto the desktop so it's clear what we need. So these are all the include files. I'll get to that in just a second. So actually, let's go back in here. You can take these 3 away. Okay. So we just want to keep all the header files. Okay. Let's just drag include over onto the desktop. Right, then we got lib files. We don't want 64-bit, we're going to work with 32-bit. If you want to work with 64-bit, you can, but in this course, I'm going to work with 32-bit. So I'm just going to delete that. Going into 32-bit or x86, we've got one DLL. Let's drag that to the desktop. And we got 3.lib files. We don't need test.lib, so you can delete that. So you just have stl2.lib and stl2main.lib. And then we'll drag those to the desktop as well. Right, once that's done, we can delete that one. And now we have all our header files, our DLL file, and our .lib files. Right, before we tuck in, just a quick word about linking third-party libraries in Windows. Each external library you download for Windows environment generally comes with a header or .h. So we have header files, okay, these are usually in .h form. We have static libraries, so static library, okay, these are usually .lib or .lib, and we have dynamic library files. These are usually coming in the form of .dll. Okay, the header files basically contain all the class and function declarations that are used during compilation. The static library files contain the functions used during the linking process of the application, and this builds into the final exe. And the dynamic library files or DLLs contain all the functions used during the runtime of the application. So when you run your exe, your final product, that's when the DLL files kick in, and that's when functions are called within that. I will go over how to build a proper distribution folder as well, and show you how and which files you need to add into the distribution folder. So we will do a brief lesson on that as well. Right, you can see here, if we just drag these down here, you can see there's our DLL, our lib, and all our .h header files. So what we're going to do is inside our project, our Visual Studio project, we're going to create a new folder. I'm going to just call it libraries. And because we're going to be linking different libraries within this course, we want to make sure that we have folders for each library. So be explicit. And maybe carrying on, if you want to do further development and you want to add other libraries, you can just make a folder for each. You don't have to, but this is more manageable. Create one for SDL. Now, convention generally is that inside the SDL or whatever library you're linking, we have our header files, our lib, and our DLLs all in their own folders. So we're going to create a new folder called include. In fact, we already have the include folder, so we'll just create one for lib and one for our DLLs, and this is usually called bin, not for dustbin, but for binary. Okay, so what we do is we take the DLL into the bin and we take our two lib files into lib, and we can just drag the include folder as is. Right, so that's what you should have. So once again, inside my project in the root, in libraries, I have SDL and I have bin, include lib, and inside there's the DLL. Inside here is all the headers, and inside here are all the lib files. Okay, back in our Visual Studio project, now we want to actually link these libraries so that Visual Studio and our project can actually pick these files up. So what we want to do is go to our project, right click and click properties, and that should open the properties pages. We want to make sure that we are in all configurations, because you can set this for debug and release. Okay, so there are two modes you can build for, but we want to make sure these libraries are linked for both. So we're going to start with V C++ directories. We go over to include. Okay, and then we want to make sure that it points to our libraries folder. So let me just quickly explain what I mean here. Okay, so looking at our folder structure, this is our root folder, and inside graphics engine, this is where our source code is going to land up. This is the starting point. So in the property pages, this is the starting point. Okay, so when we want to find the libraries folder, we need to go up one path, okay, from our source code path, up one path into the libraries folder. So to go up one path, it's .. and then we're back in the root, and then we say libraries, and then we do SDL, and then we do include, because this is where all the headers are, semicolon, press enter. Okay, include directories is all the header files that the compiler is going to look for. Similarly, library directories, these are all the lib files. Sometimes there's no semicolon here, so make sure there is one there, otherwise you may have issues. // libraries /SDL /lib. It's for all our static libraries. Hit return. Okay. And DLLs, we go to debugging, go to environment, and you can type in path equals to, again, // libraries /SDL /bin. Okay. Right, so now that the compiler knows where all the header files are, the linker knows where all the static library files are, and when we run at runtime, the program will know where all the DLLs are. What we still want to do is tell the linker exactly which specific lib files we need to link. So if you click on linker and input and go to the top one, additional dependencies, click on the drop down, edit, and it's sdl2.lib and sdl2main.lib. These are the two lib files that I added previously into the folder. These are the specific files the linker needs to know about in order to do the linking into the final exe. Okay, cool. When you've done that, hit OK, and that should all be good. Finally, one thing, you don't have to, but I like to do this. Staying on the linker tab, click on System, and what we need to do is in debug mode, first of all, save all the changes, yes. Hit to debug mode and make sure this is on console. So this allows a terminal window to appear, which is good for debug mode, and we can output messages and debug information while we're building. And in release mode, we don't want that horrible terminal window. We just click on Windows. Okay, right, once that's done, you can hit apply and OK, and everything should be set up. You can test it by going to include SDL, not SLD, SDL, and if this all appears, then we have linked it correctly. Okay, that's good. That means SDL is linked up and it can find the header files. Notice also how the main function has now gone purple because SDL has its own one and we're just overriding SDL's version, meaning we are the starting point. Right, if we build this now, we are going to be hit with horrible linker errors. They look really ugly. Because we are overriding SDL's main, we need to also make sure that the function signature is exactly as is intended and as is written by SDL. So for that we need arguments or parameters, sorry, of int argc and char argv, like that. Now if we build that again, that should be successful and we can run that. It's going to do absolutely nothing, but at least it is now properly set up, linked, and running correctly. Okay, lastly, what we want to do as well is make sure that we have the GLSL plugin installed. Okay, even though we're only using GLSL much later down the line, but let's just get that set up in the meantime. So depending on which version of Visual Studio you're using, but for 2019 there's an extensions menu option here. You just go to manage extensions and you just go to online Visual Studio Marketplace. Okay, and what you can do is just type in GLSL syntax highlighter. Okay, and you should have that there. Now I've already installed mine, hence why there's a tick here. But if not, it just gives you the option to install, and it's really, really simple. Just install, and it's all plugged in. Okay. Now just note that sometimes when Visual Studio updates, sometimes there are a couple of bugs and weird things happen. Just make sure that your GLSL language integration plugin is also updated, and this is pretty much updated quite frequently, which is a good thing. Okay. So just make sure that's done. Okay, our project is raring to go, but before we jump into the next bits of code, I think it's important that we understand OpenGL a little bit better. Moreover, a few graphics terminologies and buzzwords are also essential to understand, So in the next video, we will cover some of this theory.